Hello, YouTubers. This is the third video where we continue our conversation about the standard, the engineering standard that, I put together gathering experiences and experimentations, in the software industry to help leverage, the existing, capabilities that engineers have, just, guide these capabilities and guide these skill sets to be able to actually power up the development of some of the most complex applications out there. Today we're going to continue the discussion about abstract layers, specifically talking about brokers. In the last video we talked a little bit from a high level perspective. We put a little bit of designs. We kind of doodled a little bit around what these brokers are and what they look like. We talked very briefly about naming conventions and the type of brokers. And today we're gonna focus a little bit more. This is hands-on. I'm gonna show you how you can actually instantiate and develop, a broker, what that look like and what's the, importance of that. And I'm even gonna show you how to switch brokers, without actually impacting any of your dependencies upstream. Okay, so we talked a little bit about brokers. We talked about that they are a level of abstraction. There are liaisons between you and the outside world. They may not contain iterations. They may not contain selections. You can't have if-else statements in your brokers. You can't have try-catch in your brokers. You can't have pattern matching in your brokers. All this logic stuff that you can have, or the flow control stuff that you can have in your broker, you're not allowed to have. You also can't have, iterations, like you can't have a for loop or mapping or any of these things. You can't have, things that are meant to be unit tested, because brokers are outside of the realm of your unit tests, right? Rightfully so, because they're meant to be built with the intent that they will not contain any business logic. They don't have any business logic in them. They're just very thin layers to normalize the language, that your application is communicating with. Okay, what that basically means, from a high level perspective, and I want you to really pay very close attention in here. If you look at literally any application, any living organism in the world, really, not just software, you will notice that, there are ways where they expose particular results, right? Even in us humans, if you're sick, you're going to look sick. If you're happy, you're going to look happy. This is all exposures. And then there is logic, the processing that happens within. And then there is externals. And by externals, meaning the things that impact your application, incoming or outgoing, like integrating with a database, integrating with, an email service, integrating with a queue that sends you messages so your service can process that. This is how every single application you will ever need to build is going to look like. And it goes both ways. It's a two-way street, right? So you have incoming requests coming in through your exposers. In our case, it would be current controllers. Go through the logic. In our case, it would be services, and then you may hit the externals to communicate with an external dependency, right? So these are, just for visibility, these are controllers like this. They can be anything else, but in our case here, and these are services, foundation, coordination, whatever the case may be. And then there's externals, which are your brokers, right? And from that perspective, anything that falls in that realm, or that realm, is not subject to the unit test, but it's also a subject to the acceptance test and the end-to-end test. And we will talk about that in detail. There's so many things I want to share with you, but this is the main things that I want you to look at. Okay, exposers, logic, and externals. And externals is where your brokers live. Let's go ahead and build a real life broker together. Let's pick up this, really fun project that I started recently. It's called Ta'arafu. It's a decentralized social network, open source, to kind of deproductize humanity, from the claws of current social media. And let's go ahead and build a broker. I'm going to go ahead in here and build a loggings broker. A broker it's a utility broker. Remember how we talked about, brokers could have two types. You could have a utility broker and an entity broker. And an entity broker is something that talks about something very specific to your business, like a storage broker, putting messages on the queue, whatever the case may be. And then there's utility broker, which people used to call in the ye olden days helpers or common libraries, or any of these things that used to gather so much different functions, and then people go in and re-implement the function again, and it gets really messy and really hard to maintain. So when you're building a broker, you want to make sure that you are using a plural kind of terminology when it comes to creating folders, because your folders are namespaces. Our namespaces are meant to encapsulate multiple things that fall under the same idea or the same domain, right? So if I say storages, that means I'm gonna handle the storage interaction for students, for library cards, for teachers, for assignments, for registrations, whatever I'm going to handle the operation for. So let's build loggings broker. What do I need when I build a broker? First of all, you need a contract, and this contract needs to be as generic as it humanly can be, right? So it needs to be very generic. It needs to be very simple from a language standpoint. Of course, you're not going to hit every single generic term, but let's just start with iLoggings logging broker. Now it's singular like this. iLogging broker. Right? And this logging broker here, right, is just a contract. And we're gonna just add a little bit of stuff in here in this contract. Control KE, control period, slaps in the copyright, or you can use a configuration. My contract here is not specific to a particular class, so I'm gonna make it public. But within that contract, I have a bunch of signatures. I want to be able to offer a bunch of capabilities that should be available for all the services that is consuming this logging broker. And only the services are the consumers of logging broker. You'll never see a broker consuming another broker. You can't have a broker talk to another broker. That's not allowed. We always go in this direction. So if you go back on the map here, you'll see this theme when it comes to everything I build. If you have brokers like these, let me zoom out a little bit. If you have brokers in here and you have services like this on top of these brokers, and maybe there's an orchestration service on top here, and maybe a coordination later on, you can never ever have, and I think we talked about this in the last video, you can never ever have a broker go and say this like this. You can't do that. Why? That's literally the definition of spaghetti code, right? Because now you have things, tightly coupled. There's coupling going on here. And now brokers are talking to other brokers, and the broker is going to call the service, and it's just the beginning of the end of your application if you start mixing and intertwining things like this in that matter. Instead, everything is independent, and if I need to combine them, then I need an orchestrator to take care of that. Okay, so back to this guy, I have an iLogging broker, and I want to implement, a function like log information. And this information will take a string as a message, and that's it. Just a very simple contract that every time something happens on my system, I just want to log information. This is not trace, just information. It could be hello world for all I care, right? Okay, so this is my contract. Now I want to go and implement that contract, right? Now this concrete class piece of this implementation is what basically what materializes that contract. And that can be anything. And I'm going to show you in a second how that looks like. So I'm going to go here and say logging broker like this. And this logging broker is going to implement an interface called iLogging broker like this. Now, in my implementation in here, there's a couple of really important things that I want you to pay attention to. First of all, every single broker should match 100% the methods that a contract exposes. Someone brought this up the other day. They said, maybe we should make this public like this. But that's not needed because your interface by default, your public interface by default, the methods in it are required to be implemented. So that's not even an option, right? I'm not a big fan of having implementation in interfaces. Like you will notice some people, went ahead, and said, return message, for instance. You can actually do this today in an interface, but I don't like it. Actually, that guy returns a string there. You can actually do in an interface, this in an interface in C# today. I'm against that. This is, very bad. Don't do that. Okay, it's a capability that was introduced with C#8. Not a big fan of it. Don't go that route. Okay, so this is my logging broker. It has to match this. The IDE automatically is enforcing this kind of concept. So it's basically saying, hey, you need to implement a particular interface. Now, every broker, can consume its own dependency. So a broker in here, if I do CTOR like a constructor, I can go ahead in here and say private read-only iLogger, which is Microsoft Extension's native logger. And inside that guy, I'm going to use my logging broker as, here it is, as the class that wants to interact with this logger. And in my, I can just go ahead in here, let me remove this. You can actually build your constructor with one click of a button. If you do control period, it will say generate a constructor with these particular parameters. The only thing with the generated code is that it doesn't understand that if it's a one-liner, then we just need to express it as a fat arrow or a functional representation rather than having it scoped like that. This is just a naming convention and coding guidelines. So that means I need a logger. I need that logger guy, right? I need that logger guy so I can implement things, right? Which means, and this is very specific to C#, but it applies to anything else. I can go ahead in here and say services.add transient iLogger like this, and this logger will take logging broker like this, and it will resolve that to a logging broker with, a logger with, like this, with this particular interface. Let's do that here. There you go. There you go. So that's the logger. So I defined the logger, which is a dependency for my logging broker. But I haven't really instantiated my logging broker yet. So let's go ahead and instantiate my logging broker here. So this is services.addTransient iLogging broker. And this is my logging broker like this. And here we are. Now I built a logging broker that offers the capability. See what I did there? It offers the capability to log some information, right? Now here comes the real power. Now actually I didn't actually implement this. Let's go ahead in here and say this is message this dot logger dot log information message. Now someone might ask me a question. Someone would say, Hassan, where's the test for this? You're implementing a function without a test. I'm not really implementing a function. I'm just wrapping an existing SDK, an existing capability that is native to my app, like my actual business logic. I didn't implement this. This is not my code. Right? This logger.log information, this is Microsoft code. I didn't write any of that code. And if you didn't write any of that code, that code should not live in your business logic layer. It should live in the brokers where we abstract this away, so we can replace it later, right? Someone asked me this the other day. Some people say, you always say we're gonna replace it later, replace it later. What does that really look like? I think that's a great question. If I go here into my manage NuGet packages, there's external libraries, something like log4net. I think that's what it's called. Here, log4net, it has 79 million downloads, right? Let's go ahead and just implement that. This log4net is implemented by the Apache Software Foundation. Very popular, as far as I remember, very, very strong presence in the software industry, and it helps with, their contributions are amazing, So anyway, this is log4net. At one point in time, I came here and I said, hey, I don't want to use iLogger anymore, Microsoft technology. I want to use an external library, right? For whatever reason. See what happens here? I'm not going to change my contract. All I have to do is just change the existing implementation. So this is iLog like this. See, it's using log4net, and I want to map that to iLog like this. That's all I did. iLog. Now, in the implementation, they don't have something called log information. They have just info like this. See, I didn't violate my existing contract. So if you have services, like logging brokers are very heavily used. You're going to see it all over the place, right? So let's go back to the Blackboard here. If you have student service like this, and you have, let's say you have a teacher service And let's say you have an orchestration service that is student teacher orchestration service like this. Let's just say it does that, right? It's really, really important for you to understand that if all of these, and all of these will, if all of these come like this and they say, I want to consume the logging broker, and this guy, see, that's the abstraction piece. This little area here, that's the abstraction piece, because whatever is hiding behind that scene, let's say this is your external component. It used to be Microsoft Logger, and that's what this guy is using, right? But these guys don't know anything about this guy. They don't care. Like any of these services, they don't care about which technology you're using. All they care about is this little contract called iLogging Broker. And that's what they subscribe to, and that's what they build everything on. You can literally flip the technology in a multi-million lines of code project, multi-million dollars project. And as simple as 2 minutes, just like I did right now, 2 minutes, I completely flipped over the technology without impacting any of my dependencies. What that basically means, if I throw this away and I say, hey, I want Apache log4net like this, nothing changes. The only thing that you will modify is this little liaison, this little abstract, thin layer that you're working with. You see how simple that is? So that's basically just a very simple demonstration of how to build that abstraction. Of course, the same thing happens with storage brokers, right? When you are building storage brokers, you basically want to be able to go and say, I want to flip over from Cosmos to SQL to, Redshift to whatever technology that's out there. The one thing that you really want to be careful with is to make sure that, when you change the implementation, right, that it actually works, and that you want it, like from an enterprise standpoint, you want to make sure that your data actually moves over, right? Every single technology have its own little, quirks and implementations and little tricks when it comes to migration and, ensuring a database exists and all that kind of stuff. All of this junk, just put it behind your broker, right? And make sure that your services, where your business logic lives, doesn't know anything about these external dependencies. This is my logging broker here, and this guy here is the level of abstraction. I'm going to give it a different color because it's hybrid. It knows about the outside world, but also your local world, but it also knows about the outside world. You see the benefit? See how powerful that is? And this here applies to everything. Like, as you can see, I basically switched over. I may need to change the instantiation in here. So instead of iLogger, I want iLog, and then move on and implement this. There's so much details about how to implement this and all that kind of stuff, but that's basically a very simple example in real life about abstraction. The other thing that I want you to pay attention to is that every single broker should own its own configurations, right? So if you look at your storage broker in here in my implementation, I didn't bring in the configurations from the outside. I said, oh, just pass in the options or whatever. No, don't do that. I see a lot of people go like this in this add DB context, and they go and say options like this, options, and I used to do that myself, use SQL Server. But that's really, use SQL Server, but that's really, you're basically scattering the responsibility of your broker all over the place. Every broker should know how to configure itself. All it needs as an input parameter is the I configuration. That's why we pass this I configuration over here from my storage broker. If you don't pass this I configuration, that means you're going to have to pass something that has been initiated outside, and something that may or may not know about whether you're using SQL or Cosmos or whatever the case may be. That shouldn't be the case. All I need is the configuration, and the broker knows what to do with itself. So that's really, really important. So, okay, so this is just a glimpse, this is just another session, another glimpse about how to actually implement brokers in the real world, in real life. How do you actually implement brokers? In the next session, we're going to talk a little bit about brokers and their relationships with services. We're going to inch a little bit into the services, foundation services. the relationship between brokers and foundation services with a little bit of detail around, all the little details about consuming a broker and, do we want brokers to be transient? Do we want them to be scoped? Do we want it to be singletons? When do we determine that based on the service, life cycle of the service? Is it based on the capability of the broker, how much does it cost, and so many other aspects in our engineering standard. That's pretty much it. I'm going to try to keep it short and sweet. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to drop a comment in the comment section, and I'll see you in another video. Thank you so much for watching.